Hi everybody, Chris here from Skeleton. It's been a while since I recorded one of these videos, but we've hit a huge milestone with Skeleton and I wanted to share the news. So as you might be seeing here on the screen, we have just hit essentially the release candidate for Skeleton version v4. It's not been very long since we released v3, but we've been hard at work behind the scenes, kind of working on some, focusing on components specifically. And so you might have seen a couple posts that we've put out talking about some new proposals for some changes and showcasing a few things. But I wanted to take this, some time today and record this video so that I could actually show you what those changes entail. And so to begin with, we will have a new announcement going live alongside this video. So if you prefer to just kind of read through that, you can do that. It'll be linked in the description below the video. Any kind of relevant links for documentation and things like that will be included in that. So if you need anything like that, just feel free to click on that and you'll be able to access that. As far as the kind of goal for what today's update is what we were trying to do, we're basically rethinking how we implemented our components. And so there's been this kind of like struggle since the original version of Skeleton, where we had this idea of like, okay, we want components and we want them to have these like nice styles out of the box, and we want it to be very easy to kind of feed in utility classes and update the design and stuff as you want to customize and go. And we settled on solutions that worked pretty well and have been met with pretty good feedback as far as folks being able to use it and be successful with it. But we've kind of hit this point where we realized there's a few changes we could make that would actually make this process a lot simpler. And so that's what you're going to see reflected today. So let's just kind of dive in. We'll talk about what's changed specifically. So it's really 5 specific things that have been updated. So the first is that we're moving components to what we're calling a composed pattern. This just kind of gives you like finer grained control over the structure and sort of quickly lets you identify the different parts that make up the elements within the component. We're going to have, of course, some updates to styling, which I was just talking about. It's going to be much more intuitive. We'll show some code samples in a second here so you can kind of see what I mean. We're going to have a new approach for being able to kind of extensively modify the template within each component. So it's not just styles, but it's the markup inside as well, which is really cool. I haven't seen that in any other library, so excited to show you that. There will be some discussion of custom animations, which it's been a little harder to do with anytime you kind of abstract things to components. A lot of that kind of comes baked in, and that's difficult for users that want to have that finer grain control. So some improvements there. And then the other thing is the provider pattern. So the provider pattern just kind of gives you a way to get access to the inner API for the component and have things, special controls, state or methods that would typically not, be off limits or not available to you to do like programmatic control and things like that. So all those things are covered in this announcement, as well as some details for like specific component improvements. Do recommend you read through that and check that out. And then again, we're going to cover some of that in the video, so stick around and we'll kind of go through some of that. So the first thing I want to kind of show is some examples of those things, those features that I was talking about. And so if you come to our new documentation, you're going to see that we have a fundamental section, and we've, most of this remains the same, but we've updated the component section specifically. Just to kind of give you a better idea of how some of this works. And so we'll kind of just read through these because I think this is an excellent way to kind of understand and what those changes are that I'm talking about. So just starting here at the top, imports will be the same. It'll work exactly like you have in v3, so no change there. Just use your framework of choice, whatever the component name is, and simple as that. You do, however, now have access to the type files for the props. So if you want the different portions, you want the props for each portion of the component, you now have access to those to be able to import those. In most cases, it's just as simple as doing an import and searching for avatar and whatever, or whatever type of component you're looking for, and there's going to be the different name of the component part, and then the props appended at the end. So first things first, the compose pattern. So what is this and why is it important? And so really the main thing to take away here is that, you are probably used to using our avatar component, and it's just a single line. It's a single component, you import it, it's a single line feature, you put it in your app. It's got various props that you can kind of insert, either like the source for the image or the styling that that are specific to Skeleton. So things like the base classes, the background property, or extending the class list. Those concepts that we've kind of introduced as part of Skeleton v3. But what we've done here is we've changed this to be kind of like an accordion. We've sort of stretched out and actually kind of denoted all of the inner portions of the component itself. So you have kind of a wrapping portion, you have the image itself, and then you have like fallback. So that could be like an icon, or it could be text for the user's like initials or something like that. What this does really is it opens up a lot of doors for you as the user, though. Because previously what we had to do is we kind of had this one flat sort of instance of the component, and you had to pass everything through as props. That was your only sort of entry point to be able to provide anything into the template for the component itself. But what this does is it lets you kind of get to those layers between and be able to target exactly what you're looking for. And so this comes in the benefit of, like, when you're adjusting the image, you can just set a source. When you want an alt tag, you can just set that on the image tag. Any of those kind of like arbitrary attributes that you might associate with these different types of elements within are just now accessible. So you can pass required fields for inputs. You can do your own custom data attributes. You can use style attributes instead of a class, or you can use the well-known kind of class attribute for providing all of your kind of skeleton or tailwind utility classes into that. So that's a good segue into the next portion, styling. So a couple updates here. So the thing to kind of note about the way styling works in Skeleton is previously we had all these kind of like naming conventions. You had like base classes, we had the individual properties, we had a classes list, for extending the class list. And all of these things had a purpose. It was all kind of like built for a reason, to be able to target where classes would fall in the class list, kind of that arrangement between the styles that we provided out of the box versus the styles that you're passing in, and ensuring, and here's the keyword, precedence, ensuring that your classes would take precedence as need be. That's really been the challenge for going to sort of more of a universal, it's like, just pass all the classes in sort of approach. Because, without getting into the nitty gritty for how Tailwind works, that is a challenge for any kind of component system built on Tailwind, is that, we're used to using CSS and having the cascade, where there's kind of like, I set a color here, and then, if I set another color later, that always takes precedence. But when you're passing in classes and putting class lists, classes into a class list, there's not always that kind of guarantee of this is going to take precedence or this. They could be, regardless of the order they're defined, they could, one might take precedence and the other might not. And the reason for that is list, but which one gets defined in the CSS bundle. So your actual style sheet that's generated and shipped for your product. So the big change for today is that we are now allowing you to pass all of your classes through just a standard class attribute. That means no more base class properties, no more background properties, margin pattern, properties to remember. All of that's gone. You just pass any class that you want to adjust that component with the standard class attribute, just like you are working with raw HTML. Now, the tricky part of like how this works, I mentioned that precedence issue, is the way this actually works is that under the hood, what we're doing is we're defining our kind of internal styles, the defaults for the component, using a special technique. This is something that's come from Adam, the creator of Tailwind. He kind of proposed this originally, I believe, as something to put internally, but they've just kind of left it up to users. But the long story short, what it is a custom variant. So variants are, you might be familiar with Tailwind, of if I have like hover, and a colon, or breakpoint and a colon, those kind of prefixes that you're applying, those are variants, and you're able to define your own custom variants. And so what we've defined is a custom variant. We just call it SKB for skeleton base. What that does is any sort of classes that we're putting this prefix on will then apply it to the base layer. And so the layers you can kind of think of, as the name implies, it's different ways to kind of order and set precedence for the classes that go into the bundle. And so by us setting all of our classes with this prefix to the base layer, that means any classes that are appended to the end of that class list for that HTML element then just take precedence. That means when you pass your classes in for the class list, they're appended on the class list, and it just works. It just takes precedence. No, needing to merge or do anything fancy with it. It just works. It just takes precedence, which is really nice. So I think just between these two changes of having this kind of deep access to the innards of the component structure, the component tree, and the ability to just pass loose classes into with the class list, this is night and day, a completely different experience with using Skeleton V4. It really makes things very intuitive for new users and very easy for all of us that just are used to just working with HTML. It just makes it really easy to apply and adjust what you want. I will kind of mention there is one little trade-off here in that in prior versions of Skeleton we used this prop approach, and what that would do is when you say you have a background color for an avatar or something like that, when you would pass in your utility class to change that color, it would actually swap that out. Now it's actually overriding. So just kind of keep that in mind of, hey, like prior I could just pass like an empty background prop and it would remove that background. Now you might need to do something like background transparent or something along those lines to, kind of enforce that, hey, I don't want a background or I don't want a color, one of the default values if you want to disable that or turn that off. The other kind of cool feature we're adding today here is the extensible markup feature. So we've provided a couple examples on the screen here. I'll try to scroll these so you can kind of see these. General idea here is this allows you access to the markup within each component. And so this has a few kind of use cases. Primarily aimed towards power users. Your normal day-to-day user is probably not going to need to use this, but allows you to kind of get in there and say, hey, I've got an accordion. Maybe you have a trigger element. By default, there's a button or something like that that's used as the kind of element for the markup. But I want to be able to replace that with my own markup. So maybe put your own button or something like that. You can now do that. This can be really handy if you have like complex styles and you need to have maybe some extra like span tags or something like that inserted that don't exist in the component template as is. This kind of gives you that way to do that. And the way it works, I'll show you the svelte version. I think it's the easiest to parse. Is basically every single component in Skeleton has a snippet or property in this case for React called element. It's universal. It's shared through every one of these. And then within those, we pass the attributes that are provided and applied to that particular element so that you can then replicate that and replace it on the element you want. So basically, you would drop an element snippet in here, you would pull out the attributes that are used for the internal functionality for that particular element, and then you just make sure that those are applied to your own custom markup. Simple as that. Now you might be asking, like, what's the use case for this? So that's where the next feature comes in. So what this does is it actually opens the door for you to do complex styling or complex kind of changes to the markup itself that would never be possible with just your standard component markup. So what that means is here we can now kind of change the animations. So if we have an accordion like this, maybe we want to animate that drawer kind of sliding open or close. So for that we would use the content section, we would use that standard element snippet, we would grab the attributes from that, and then we would put our own kind of custom, element in here, be that a div or what have you. And then we can start changing that markup, start changing things. And so first things first, we would kind of take control of the hidden attribute that's being used to open and close and show that, so that the animation can take control and do that. In this case, we're using the built-in svelte transition system, and we're just applying a slide transition and a duration. And then now when we would view that component, we would see that slide animation. And so that's you as the user having direct control over the implementation of those animations. And so you might not want to use svelte transitions. Maybe you want to use something like Motion or Anime.js, which are dedicated high power libraries for creating really powerful animations. So definitely recommend checking out those couple options. Maybe you want to go CSS, the CSS route, use CSS animations. So lots and lots of options for how you can kind of control this, but having access to those DOM elements just kind of opens up a door to a whole new world that was just not possible with prior versions of Skeleton. The last big feature I want to talk about today is the provider pattern. So the provider pattern, this might be something you're familiar with if you're coming from the React world. This is a convention that's used quite regularly. If you're on the Svelte side, maybe it's something you haven't encountered. But general idea here is this gives you a way to kind of key into the inner API of the component itself. So most components in Skeleton are generated using kind of a foundational tool called Zag.js. What Zag does is provides the primitives for most of the components that we use and implement, and so that's controlling state and logic and things like that. This now kind of gives you direct access to those kind of inner APIs that is at play under the hood there. So we've provided kind of a code snippet here to kind of show a quick example. So we have a tooltip component. This has the root component replaced with a provider. The provider then has access to like a reference value for, hey, I'm going to control this particular instance of this tooltip. And then from that, you can then run any sort of like options against that or methods against that Zag would typically apply for you internally within the component. So you can use the set set open method from Zag, or be able to check what the open state is directly from that. And so really kind of fine-tune programmatic control. And again, this is available for all components that are built with Zag.js, which is every component currently implemented except the app bar and the navigation components. Those are just custom components that we implement and ship for Skeleton itself. So again, really, really cool stuff here. Opens up a lot of doors, and just the combination, even if you're only using these first couple features, I think it's going to be a world-changing kind of experience for how much easier it is to use Skeleton going forward. Now, these are the big features. There's a few things I do want to kind of just showcase as just small changes that have happened to the existing components. So I mentioned the navigation component a moment ago. So in the previous versions of Skeleton, we had this component. You'll be able to kind of create this sort of like bottom navigation drawer or side rail. Well, we've expanded that. We now have a third option that is newly available, which is sidebar. So you can kind of think of this might be your navigation interface for mobile. This might be for like a tablet user experience, and this would be something for desktop, potentially even like in a slide out drawer. Drawers are a feature, as part of Dialog, you can kind of build sort of a drawer type feature. Now the cool thing is these are using the same component under the hood, which means that you can then kind of like toggle between each sort of layout state and be able to see that work. So I have a rail here, and I'm going to toggle it to the sidebar layout, and you're going to see that just kind of transitions nice and smooth. Feature that's been, we kind of had sort of implemented in prior versions, but now it's like fully adopted and really kind of properly implemented inside of this component. Another change is you might be seeing kind of the list of components over here on the right. It may look a little longer than before. The reason being is that a lot of what we consider popover components, which would include the popover, the combo box, the dialog, and the tooltip components, are now just part of Skeleton's normal component library, where we were kind of treating them separately as we were kind of looking at different options for how we'd handle overlays, floating elements, or popovers, or whatever you want to call them. But we've decided we'll just kind of go all in with the offering that comes from again, Zag.js, and allows us to not just generate and share those for one framework, which was Svelte, but we've now also kind of brought these same components over to React as well. So it's now a universal component available for all frameworks that we support, which is really cool. The other kind of neat thing with these components is that in prior versions they came kind of pre-styled, and that was very handy when you had a very simple use case. You might want to like click and see like a dialogue and have that displayed here. But we've made a change under the hood where any of the 4 components that I just mentioned, those kind of overlay components, they are headless out of the box. And the reason we've kind of taken this approach is that we don't want to take an opinion on how you want to style those particular elements. Like maybe you want your dialogue to be small, maybe you want it to be big, maybe you want it to be in the corner, maybe you want it to be, pop up or animate like we've talked about a moment ago. All those options are now in your control. We provide a very simple base so that you can kind of build on that and make it your own, make it look however you need to, because just the dialogue component alone, you could use that in a variety of different ways. You could create standard kind of notification. You could create a slide out drawer like I'm showing here on the screen. Lots and lots of different ways you can style that same sort of primitive and create several different sort of interfaces up. The other thing you might notice is that we do have at least one new component listed here, which is the portal component. This is sort of like a utility component. It's not necessarily for interface, but we're using this kind of behind the scenes to power things like those pop-up components I was just talking about, to sort of set those on sort of a layer above the rest of your page. Now there's 3 other components that we currently have in the works that are not currently listed on the documentation site, but we plan to have for launch. So these are highly requested features. So the tree view component, which people have been really wanting for a long time. Date picker, which I know I've wanted for a very long time. That's coming. It's going to look really cool. It's going to have lots and lots of features. And then list box. So we had a previous, a version of list box in Skeleton v2. Didn't make the transition to v3, and we're going to be bring that back in v4. Another kind of quick thing I want to show you is that in for all of our components, in prior versions, we would have to kind of control the styles, the default styles for each component per each framework. So we have the avatar component in Svelte, and we have the avatar component in React, and we had to kind of duplicate a lot of the properties and the styling and across all that, and kind of keep that uniform. And it ran into we ran into edge cases where one framework would be slightly different than the other, something like that. That's now gone in the new version of Skeleton. We're actually using a common set of styles that we define in one place in our in our development process, and we utilize those throughout. So these are all of the default classes that are applied to our avatar component, regardless of what framework it's implemented on. So you might see some just nice little style benefits from that. And if you're curious of what those default styles are, any of the documentation pages, just click that little CSS button at the top, and it will show you those. This is also probably a good segue into some of the updates to the documentation as well. So not only do we have this handy little button here, but if you scroll down, you're going to see our API reference has been overhauled. So the interface for this actually shows a lot more information than our prior version. And so if you're really wanting to know what props are available for each portion, each part of the component, the provider we talked about, the root component, the image component, these should be detailed here. The other kind of neat thing you're going to see is just kind of sandwiched in here is under the image component or the fallback component, it shows the list of default styles here. So you're going to see those displayed without having to go to that source view. You can actually just see the applied styles on here. So if you are creating an avatar, you've got the image component, you want to know what the default sort of styles are applied to that, those will be readily accessible. The other thing, and I kind of went past this very quickly, was with the new compose structure. We are doing typing for each type of element. So if it's a div or it's an image tag, it will have type safety applied to that, so that it will auto suggest only the types of elements or types of attributes that are relevant for that element. So you'll only get suggested for the source or the alt attributes for the image. and then anything for like a div, you'll get those suggested. And if you apply an attribute that is not relevant for that type of element, you'll get a little warning from that as well. So even though those dramatic long lists of props available to the raw HTML elements are not detailed on here, just wanted to kind of call out that those things are in there, and you'll see some type safety kind of guaranteed or applied to some of that. The other thing here is that if you are somebody that really likes to deep dive on this and some of those technical details that I've been kind of talking about or sharing, if you're curious to kind of see more about how that's actually, how those things are functionally working under the hood, I would recommend coming down to the contribute section, component section here, and then just kind of run through this. We've updated all of our guidelines for anybody that wants to contribute a new component to kind of detail the technical specs for what it takes to implement a component. And so even if you are not somebody that's wanting to contribute to Skeleton, this may still be relevant to you, as many times you end up building custom components for your own application. So maybe you're building a custom header or a custom footer or something like that for your site. You might want to follow the same specs that we do to implement so that you get all of those, fun new features that I was talking about, of being able to just use a class attribute, to be able to have the type safety for the elements, to be able to do the kind of extensible markup and animations and all of that. So if you want to follow the standards that we've implemented for ourselves, all of that is documented in place on here. So definitely check that out. Very cool stuff. So just about ready to close this out. So I do want to kind of point out a couple more things here. So if you are somebody that's interested in trying this out, again, this is a release candidate. This is kind of treated as the sort of the last major sort of beta or early access sort of release prior to the full launch, which means that it's relatively stable. But there could be some bugs, there could be some things that we're still tweaking or changing, those extra components we talked about that are coming that have not been implemented, things like that. So just kind of be aware, like, we do have parity with Skeleton v3 as far as the number of features, but there is some wiggle room there if some things need to change. But if you want to migrate, we do have this migrate from v3 option here. This will transition you to the release candidate for now and the full release when that's ready. It's a very simple process. Just make sure that you've kind of backed up your work. You're on a dedicated branch. Remove the old packages. So remove the core package and your Reactor Svelte package for the components. Install the @next version of either of those, and then there's one style sheet to call that you can go in and change. Just go in your global style sheet. This is something we included in prior versions of Skeleton. It's just no longer needed, so allows you to remove that line. Very quick and easy. As far as migrating the components themselves, we are looking into options if we can find some ways to help automate some of this. Likely going to be things like updating your imports and maybe removing that style sheet line and things like that. But for the components themselves, it is such a dramatic change that you are likely going to need to do some manual migration with that. There's just really some nuance in there that can't be captured, expressed with automated tools, unfortunately. But we've kind of detailed not only here's the process, like a step-by-step, like here's how you would do that, here's the documentation you would reference, that kind of thing, just to kind of help you get started. Once you think you've done it once, I think most people will be able to understand how to do it for the rest of the components. The other thing is there is a handful of components that have been renamed. We're sorry to keep changing this stuff on you, but the idea here is that we have now fallen on a standard to just follow the naming convention that Zag.js provides. So we're using their primitives, we're building on those, we're just going to use those names so that everything is established and predictable going forward. Now, if you do check out the migration and try out the new release candidate, please let us know how it goes. Let us know what your experience with this. Let us know if there's any pain points. Let us know if there's any gaps in the documentation. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to get feedback on to prepare for the full release. So if we don't have those, we can't know if everything's ready to go to the full release and go to the public. So please test it, provide your feedback. We always love to hear that stuff. Let us know. We do also provide a link back to the contributor documentation I was just talking about. So if you want that deep dive, all of that is accessible and available for you to go in there and check that out. I think with that, that kind of wraps and covers everything we wanted to talk about today. Again, please go hands-on. Please try it out. I think you're going to love it. There's been a ton of heart and soul kind of put into this. Huge shout-outs to Hugo from the Skeleton team, who has not only kind of created a lot of the proposals, but helped implement and do a lot of the heavy lifting to make this a reality. Him and I have just put a ton of work over the last few months, and we really hope you enjoy it. So there we go. Please enjoy. Thanks, everybody.